I was watching a friend of mine navigate the early stages of a new relationship recently. She prides herself on being emotionally intelligent, and she was describing this pivotal moment where she decided to be vulnerable with her partner. She described the scene with intense precision. The dim lighting, the serious tone, and the carefully curated disclosure of a past hurt. She treated her heart like a rare museum artifact, something incredibly fragile that she would only unveil if the security conditions were absolutely perfect. She told me with a sigh of relief, I finally felt safe enough to show him who I am. But looking at her, I noticed a strange contradiction. She didn't look free, she looked exhausted. She was treating vulnerability as a high-stakes negotiation. She was constantly scanning for danger, measuring his reactions, ready to pull the shutters down the second he flinched. It struck me that what she called opening up was actually the ultimate form of defense. She wasn't flowing, she was fencing. She wasn't sharing herself. She was managing a public relations campaign for a specific version of her identity. It raised a terrifying but necessary question that completely undermines how we view love.
What exactly was she trying to protect inside that fortress? If you actually look past the stories, the strategies, and the obsession with safety, is there really anything solid in there that can be broken? Or are we spending our entire lives guarding a ghost? That terrifying question, are we spending our entire lives guarding a ghost? That's really the heart of today's deep dive. We're talking about the sheer exhaustion of being on guard all the time.
Mm-hmm. So our mission today is to go way beyond the usual advice about, strategic vulnerability. We want to get to the root cause of why we even feel the need for armor in the first place.
Right. And to present a really radical alternative.
Exactly. The idea of genuine invulnerability, which is found not by building bigger walls, but through the practice of defenselessness.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. And this journey is going to take us to some interesting places. We're starting with clinical psychology to map out all these defenses.
And into some pretty profound spiritual practices.
And we'll land in the professional world in the boardroom to see how this all applies in a practical way. We want to show you how this one shift, your relationship to defense, it really can change everything.
It really can. And that opening story you shared is it's so perfect because that effort, the sheer energy it takes to manage that identity is exhausting.
It was visible on her face.
I bet it's this constant struggle to maintain control, to make sure that fragile internal story, that ghost, as you put it, is never, ever harmed.
So to find a way out of that, we first have to figure out what's going on inside.
We do. We have to diagnose the core psychological error that makes us feel so vulnerable to begin with. The fortress is just a response to, well, a pretty simple misunderstanding about who we really are.
Okay, so let's start right there with that fundamental error. Why does so much of life feel like a battle instead of, an adventure? The material we've looked at points to this simple but, profound idea that most of our suffering comes from a simple case of mistaken identity.
It's probably the most costly mistake any of us make in our lives.
And this mistaken identity is the ego.
It's the ego identification, yeah. Some people call it the mini-me. It's that constructed self, the story, the history, the collection of all our fears and wins that we start to believe is us.
Okay.
And its destructive genius, if you can call it that, is how it co-opts the body's physical survival program.
So it's taking the hardware that's meant to keep us from getting eaten by a lion.
Exactly.
And it's applying it to emotional threats.
Precisely. The system that's designed for physical survival gets triggered by threats to its narrative survival. So an emotional slight, someone cuts you off in traffic, a colleague criticizes you, your partner frowns.
It's no longer just data.
It's a threat to your very existence.
Yeah.
The ego starts screaming, this means I'm unlovable, and if I'm unlovable, I'll be alone, and if I'm alone, I will die.
Wow. So the stakes get raised instantly.
To the absolute maximum.
Yeah.
You feel this intense pressure to maintain control, to be right, because to that little mini-me structure, being dead wrong feels literally lethal.
Okay, hang on. A boss's frown feeling lethal. Can you break down the biology of that? How does the ego actually hijack our survival instincts?
It's a direct physical process. When that ego self feels threatened, the hypothalamus gets activated, which kicks off the whole HPA axis, the body's central stress response system.
Okay.
Then the adrenal glands just dump adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream. And these aren't, imaginary chemicals.
Right, they're real.
They're real, powerful hormones designed to get your muscles ready for immediate, aggressive action. For fight or for flight. Your body genuinely believes it needs to run for its life.
Which explains my friend's exhaustion. She was biologically on high alert.
She was in a state of hypervigilance,
Yeah.
constantly scanning her environment for danger, even though the danger was just, a conceptual threat to her story.
So the story triggers the biology.
And then the biology reinforces the story. It's a vicious cycle.
Right.
We see this so clearly with that example of the student who got a promotion. You'd think she'd be celebrating, right?
Of course.
But instead, she sees her boss frown for a split second, and she just spirals. Her inner monologue isn't, oh, my boss is probably just having a bad day.
Yeah.
It's, I'm definitely getting fired. I'll lose my apartment. My partner's going to leave me, and I'll end up dying alone.
Those are full-blown survival narratives.
They are delusional scenarios that get confused with actual present moment threats. But the body, it doesn't know the difference. The fear chemicals are real, and they're flooding this poor, innocent body that is, in reality, perfectly safe.
And the ultimate trick is that the feeling, that visceral fear, it makes the story feel like an undeniable fact.
Yes, that is the key. Because fear is such a powerful biological experience, it cements the mistaken identity's belief that someone real is being threatened.
And that conviction is what drives all the destructive behavior.
All of it. The lashing out, the blaming, or the other side of the coin, the anxiety, the depression, the shutting down. And the energy required to maintain that entire system, that's the exhaustion you saw in your friend. She was dedicating all her resources to guarding a ghost.
Okay, so once that fear gets activated, the fortress walls go up, and we deploy these protective strategies. And they're not random, are they? They're basically organized defensive war maneuvers.
That's a great way to put it. They're strategies we see in actual physical combat. Surrender, withdrawal, or counterattack.
And these show up in our communication, especially when we feel criticized or, exposed.
Exactly. The moment that mistaken identity feels threatened, even by something small, like feedback on a report, we unconsciously fall back on these tactics to protect the narrative.
So let's break down the 6 common reactions. We can start with the surrender maneuvers. These always seem a bit tricky because they can hide aggression.
They can. The first is surrender betray. In this one, you give in to the criticism really quickly, but the crucial part is you internalize it. You turn the blame on yourself.
So it's self-blame as a defense.
Yes, to protect the relationship. You see it a lot in codependent dynamics. A partner unfairly criticizes your plan for the weekend, and you immediately say, you're right, I'm so stupid, I should have thought of that, even when the plan was perfectly fine. You sacrifice your own self-worth for a moment of peace.
Right. And the second type of surrender sabotage. That sounds a little more active.
It's classic passive aggression. You agree on the outside, yes, boss, I'll get that report done by Tuesday. But then you undermine the goal. You turn it in late, it has errors, you drag your feet.
So the compliance is just a shield.
It's a shield, and behind it, the resentment is driving you to sabotage the outcome. It protects the ego by making sure the other person's demand fails, proving that they were wrong, not you.
Okay, that brings us to withdrawal. This is all about creating distance, right? The most obvious one being withdrawal escape.
That's the one we all know. You avoid the person, you change the subject, you physically leave the room, or you just mentally check out. It's a simple refusal to engage.
But there's a more insidious one. Withdrawal entrap. What is that?
That is calculated inaction. It's when you deliberately withhold necessary information or clarification from someone, basically hoping they'll make a mistake.
So you can say, I told you so.
Pretty much. The withdrawal validates your own protective stance. See, I knew I couldn't trust them. Look, they messed up. It's a defense that validates itself through someone else's failure. Imagine a team member holding back some key budget info so that their rival's project goes over.
Oof. Yeah, that's a rough one.
Yeah.
Okay, so that moves us into the more aggressive postures, the counterattack strategies.
Right. First, you have counterattack justify. When someone criticizes you, you launch into this long, detailed explanation for your behavior. But the goal isn't really to inform them.
It's to prove them wrong.
It's to prove them wrong for being upset in the first place. You're trying to talk your way out of the feeling of being wrong. It's that endless email chain justifying one tiny oversight.
We've all seen that. And then finally, the most direct one, counterattack blame.
This is just a direct attack, shifting the spotlight. Instead of taking the feedback about your performance, you say, well, you're one to talk. Your last project was a total disaster.
And the tragic myth in all of this is that we think these maneuvers are protecting us.
They're not. They burn up all our energy, they destroy trust, and they just reinforce that core belief that this fragile ghost inside needs to be guarded at all costs.
That moment I described with my friend, the carefully curated disclosure, it wasn't real sharing, was it? It was a maneuver. It sounds like it fits perfectly with this clinical concept of pseudo-vulnerability.
It does, and this is such a crucial distinction in therapy, in relationships, everywhere. Because if you mistake this pseudo-vulnerability for the real thing, that's often why emotional growth just stalls out.
So what's the difference?
Well, authentic vulnerability comes from what schema therapy calls the vulnerable child mode. It's about expressing a genuine, specific emotion that's tied to a real, present, unmet need. I feel anxious because I need some reassurance, or I feel sad because I miss you. It's specific, and it's seeking connection.
And pseudo-vulnerability is the opposite of that.
Right. It's a maladaptive coping mode. It shows up as this vague, diffuse, global distress, just generalized misery. And its real function is to act as a kind of smokescreen to cleverly mask the true underlying vulnerability, like shame or helplessness.
And the goal isn't connection.
The goal is to manage the interaction to get something else, usually rescue or avoidance.
And the danger then is that if a partner or a therapist misreads this, their response actually makes things worse.
Yeah.
You mentioned this iatrogenic effect.
It's a serious problem. The word iatrogenic just means an illness caused by the treatment itself. In therapy, if a client is using pseudo-vulnerability to avoid, say, deep-seated shame, and the therapist just responds with endless nurturing and soothing.
You're basically rewarding the defense.
Exactly. You're reinforcing the coping mode. It fosters this unhealthy dependence, and it teaches the person that I have to suffer dramatically to get care. It prevents them from ever accessing their own healthy adult self to deal with their core pain.
So they get a temporary fix, but the underlying issue never gets addressed.
Right. It leads to this chronic dissatisfaction and feeling stuck.
Okay, to make this really practical, let's go through the different types, because they don't all look the same. You've grouped them into 3 postures: surrender, avoidance, and overcompensation.
Right. Let's start with the A, surrender pseudo-vulnerable modes. This is the helpless surrenderer, the person who collapses into helplessness to get a response.
And there's a care seeker version of that.
Yes. The care seeker is really overtly clingy, frantic, passive. They might beg or plead. They have this deep, unmet need for a perfect rescue that they never got as a child.
And this can get pretty intense.
It can. They might even hint at being at risk or suicidality. Not always because they intend to harm themselves, but it becomes the ultimate tool to get care and prevent abandonment. We saw this with the case Serena. She'd call her therapist multiple times a day in a state of frantic anxiety, just demanding reassurance.
But no amount of care was ever enough.
Never. The connection became addictive. She wasn't seeking intimacy. She was seeking a fix to regulate her system.
It's that bottomless pit effect, right? The need is always there because the core wound isn't being healed. It's just being patched over by someone else.
That's it, exactly. Then you have the resigned version.
How is that different?
This person is more avoidant, kind of frozen, and outwardly hopeless. They express their needs not through words, but through somatization, so through the body. Physical fragility, chronic unexplained illnesses.
So the physical symptoms become the only legitimate language for needs that they couldn't express otherwise.
Yes, the body literally takes on the emotional work. Think of Tanya, who presented with debilitating chronic pain and an eating disorder. The physical pain gives a secondary game.
Meaning?
It legitimizes their need for rest and care and attention in a way they feel they can't ask for directly without feeling guilty. They're basically resigned to suffering, and the body becomes the defenseless stand-in for the vulnerable self.
Okay, now what about the be-avoidant pseudo-vulnerable modes? The complaining protector.
The whole function of this mode is to build a wall of complaints. It's a smokescreen to keep anyone from getting close enough to see the real, painful emotions underneath, like shame or loneliness.
And you see this in the help-seeking, help-rejecting type.
Oh, classic. They complain endlessly about their suffering, but then actively shoot down every single solution or piece of advice you offer.
Why reject the help if you're complaining so much?
Because the complaint is the defense. If you accept the solution, the wall comes down, and you have to actually face your inner world. They're avoiding intimacy by maintaining their misery.
And then there's a more aggressive version.
The belligerent complaining protector. This version externalizes every single problem. It's always someone else's fault.
Like Rita, who complained constantly about her husband's flaws.
Exactly. The focus is hyper outward. It's criticizing other people, institutions, circumstances. They position themselves as the eternal victim of outside forces, and the goal is to block any kind of self-reflection.
And that's different from real anger.
Very. If you validate the needs of someone who's genuinely angry, The anger usually diffuses. The belligerent mode's frustration just persists or even gets worse because the goal isn't to resolve anything. It's to protect itself through blame.
Okay, finally, we have C, overcompensatory pseudo-vulnerable modes.
Yeah.
This is where suffering is used as a form of power.
Right. And it can be very manipulative. The first one is attention recognition seeking, which you could call the don't blame me mode.
What does that look like?
It's these highly dramatic, intense displays of pain, often way out of proportion to whatever triggered them, and it almost always erupts when the person is confronted or held accountable for something.
So it's a way to evade responsibility.
Precisely. The unspoken message is, I'm suffering so much right now you can't possibly confront me or you'll break me. It forces everyone else to walk on eggshells, which neutralizes the confronter and protects the ego from taking any blame.
And then the most classic presentation, the martyr.
The self-pity victim or martyr mode. Like the case of Paul, this person presents their suffering superficially, almost like they're wearing it as a badge of honor.
Look how much I sacrifice for everyone.
I'm sacrificing so much, but have no choice. They're looking for pity, recognition, a sense of self-importance that comes from their victimhood. They aren't actually looking for a real connection or relief. Their entire identity is so invested in being the suffering savior that genuine self-care would undermine their whole story.
They're guarding the ghost of their own self-importance by clinging to their suffering.
You got it.
This is incredibly helpful for telling the difference between real vulnerability and its defensive imposter. So for someone on the receiving end, a partner, a friend, a therapist, what are the clearest signs to look for?
Well, you can look at 4 things: the language, the goal, the quality of the connection, and the emotional response you feel.
Okay.
Authentic vulnerability is felt deeply. It's described with specific, nuanced language. The goal is genuine connection and intimacy, and it makes you feel real, sustained empathy.
Whereas pseudo-vulnerability feels more calculated.
It is. The person talks about their emotions in these vague, global, or abstract terms, like, I'm just so miserable. The goal is really control and avoidance of that core pain.
And the emotion itself can feel a bit staged.
It can feel histrionic or rehearsed.
Oh.
And the attachment quality is the real tell. Instead of real intimacy, the person is seeking an addictive, quick, fixed constant reassurance, immediate strategies, pity. It prevents them from ever having to use their own inner resources, their own healthy adult.
Thinking about my friend again. She was describing her vulnerability, but she was also measuring the reaction, ready to bolt.
Yeah.
That fits the goal of control and avoidance, not true connection.
Exactly.
So how should a partner or a friend respond to that without falling into the rescuer role?
Well, that brings us right to the therapist trap, the countertransference reaction. Pseudo-vulnerability is incredibly good at recruiting the rescuer in other people, especially in people who are natural caretakers or have a self-sacrifice schema themselves.
And that puts the helper right into Cartman's drama triangle, doesn't it? The pseudo-vulnerable person is the victim, the situation is the perpetrator, and now you're the rescuer.
Exactly right. And the helper starts trying to fix something that's unfixable. They feel this compulsion to fill that bottomless pit of need, which just leads to them feeling stuck, inadequate, trapped, and eventually completely burned out.
And by rescuing, you're actually reinforcing the whole dysfunctional dynamic.
You are. You're sending the message that the other person is too fragile to handle their own pain. The real path forward isn't rescue. It's what we call empathic confrontation. You validate the pain they are showing, but you gently confront the defensive nature of the coping mode itself, and you encourage them to find and use their own resources.
Okay, we have spent a lot of time diagnosing the fortress and all the strategies we use to guard the ghost. But if all of that is just exhausting and counterproductive, we need a totally different approach.
A radical shift.
Which brings us to the core of this whole deep dive. The move from defense to defenselessness. This is the path to, well, genuine psychological and spiritual invulnerability.
This is where we stop trying to manage the ego and start trying to dissolve it. All the non-dual spiritual traditions point to the same insight, that our true nature is already that. It's this eternal, whole, pristine awareness.
And the psychological work we just talked about sort of clears the ground for that.
It does. Confronting the coping modes gets rid of the clutter. Then the practice of defenselessness becomes the most direct, efficient way to actually experience this indestructible presence instead of just, having an intellectual idea about it.
It sounds terrifying, though. I mean, doesn't being defenseless just mean you're inviting people to hurt you?
And that is the crucial clarification. Defenselessness is an inner practice, not an external one. It is not about becoming a doormat or failing to set healthy boundaries in the real world. It means relaxing the internal protective habits, the vigilance, the need to control the narrative, the urge to justify all the things that buffer us from making contact with our true nature. We stop guarding the ghost.
So it's about choosing not to argue with reality inside your own head.
That's a perfect way to put it. And in that choice, you discover what you could call the power of nothing. When you genuinely seek nothing, reject nothing, and commit to being nothing, when that story of the ego-driven me is finally rendered defenseless, the story just disappears.
And when the thing that's in conflict vanishes.
The conflict vanishes. The fragile self is gone, and this new dimension of silent, expansive presence opens up. There's nothing left to fight for or against, because there's no separate self that can be harmed.
Okay, but if our ego is designed for survival, it has to react violently when we try to be defenseless. What does that feel like inside, and how do you stay with it without just rebuilding the armor instantly?
It feels like an acute crisis. It really does. When you intentionally lower those defenses, these awkward, intense feelings just rush in. Overwhelming fear, catastrophic thoughts, a sense of total hopelessness, or just that terrifying feeling of, I don't know what to do.
But that's the point.
That is precisely the moment to strike gold, as the spiritual teachers say. That's the raw, unmediated pain that all the defenses were built to keep you away from.
Right.
And if you can just stay present with it, stay soft and open to the actual physical sensations of that fear, without attaching a new story to it, without judging it, without rushing to fix it, you literally pass through the vulnerability the defenses were built to protect.
So we can see the defenses compassionately as this natural instinct from infancy.
Absolutely. When we were infants, disconnection felt like death, so this mind-body contraction happened. We shut down experiences that felt like too much.
It's like this armor is just mud covering the exquisite jewel of our being.
And we spend our entire lives trying to make the mud look good. But defenselessness takes advantage of the natural cracks that appear in our lives. A major loss, an illness, a failure. Instead of just patching up the ego's veneer, a mature approach uses that breakdown as a portal.
A chance to peer underneath.
Yes, to see that the essence of our being was never actually damaged. And that's the move from just surviving to true liberation.
To maintain that state of defenselessness, the most critical skill has to be disidentification. The realization that we're not our thoughts.
We have to dismantle the illusion of inner authority that makes us believe every thought is true.
And this is fighting against what you call cognitive fusion.
Right. Cognitive fusion is that state where your identity and your experience just collapse into the thought itself. You don't just have a thought of failure, you are a failure. That automatic fusion is the engine of all our suffering because the ego has no distance from its own internal monologue.
And this tendency is literally baked into our brain structure, isn't it?
It's deeply ingrained through the default mode network, or the DMN. The DMN is the circuitry that lights up when we're not focused on a task, when we're daydreaming, ruminating, thinking about ourselves.
It's the storyteller.
It's the storyteller. Its job is to construct and maintain the coherent narrative of me, which is essential for functioning. But when we mistake that narrative for our absolute, unchanging self, it becomes a prison.
So how do you interrupt that loop?
Not by fighting it. It just requires awareness. Seeing the thoughts and the self-referential stories as impersonal, immaterial events, like clouds passing in the sky.
And we have to extend that disidentification beyond just our thoughts to all forms.
Yes. In wisdom traditions, form means anything knowable by the six senses. What you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and what the mind itself perceives. Thoughts, emotions, physical sensations.
So my body's a form, my career is a form.
They're all forms. They're all temporary. They're all subject to change and decay, and therefore, they're all vulnerable.
So what's left when we stop identifying with all those vulnerable, temporary things?
The formless self. This is just formless awareness or presence. That silent, unchanging space in which all the forms arise and dissolve. The wisdom traditions call it Atman, Nefesh, Buddha nature. It has many names.
And that awareness is indestructible.
It's eternal, it's pristine, and it's indestructible, which is why it doesn't need any defense. The whole journey is about moving from conceptual consciousness, where we live inside our stories and suffer, to mindfulness consciousness.
Which is non-conceptual awareness.
It's a direct, open relationship with the present moment. And from that place, you can see your thoughts and emotions clearly for what they are. Transient events, and you can relate to them with love and wisdom instead of reactive defense and exhaustion. You stop guarding the ghost because you realize you're the space the ghost is moving through.
The philosophy of defenselessness is really profound, but it absolutely needs a concrete daily practice, or we're just going to slip right back into our old habits.
It does. It needs an anchor.
And that anchor seems to be radical acceptance, a core skill from dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT.
It's maybe the most transformative distress-tolerant skill there is, because it gets right to the root of what we call secondary suffering.
So what is it exactly?
It's defined as completely and totally accepting reality from the depths of your soul without judgment, without resistance, without avoidance. It means letting go of the illusion that you can control reality or that things should be different than they are.
And the cost of not doing that is captured in that simple equation. Pain plus non-acceptance, suffering.
Right. Pain is a natural part of life. Emotional pain, physical pain, it happens. But suffering is the extra layer we add on top when we fight against that pain.
So you feel grief, which is pain.
And then your mind starts arguing, I shouldn't feel this sad, this isn't fair, I have to fix this right now. That's the non-acceptance, and it just intensifies and prolongs the distress. Like Jung said, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size.
Resistance is that energy drain my friend was feeling.
It's the whole ball game.
You know, the idea that acceptance leads to change feels so backward to a lot of people. They think you have to fight to make things better. But Carl Rogers' paradox captures it perfectly.
He said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. You can't start changing something if you're still fighting the reality of its existence. Resistance is this huge psychological wall that just delays healing.
So acceptance gives you a firm foundation to move from.
It's the stillness from which constructive movement becomes possible. When you stop trying to push away negative emotions, you give them permission to just be, to rise, crest, and eventually fall, which lets your system naturally process the experience.
Okay, since resistance is such an automatic defensive habit, we need a proactive way to choose acceptance, and that's the skill called turn the mind.
Turn the mind is the practical, moment-to-moment commitment to radical acceptance. It's an ongoing 3-stage process. The first is recognition. You have to pause and acknowledge that the intense suffering you're feeling right now, it's not being caused by the external event, it's being caused by your fighting of that event.
You have to see that the fight itself is the problem.
Right. Then comes the second stage, which is the decisive moment.
The inner commitment.
You make a conscious, intentional decision to accept the situation as it is, even if it's incredibly painful. And that commitment shifts you from being a victim of your circumstances to an agent of your own acceptance. And often that declaration brings an immediate, if subtle, sense of inner peace.
Even if nothing outside has changed.
Even if nothing has changed. And the third stage is just practice. It's the persistent vigilance against the gravitational pull of our old habits.
The pull of what you call willfulness.
Yeah, you have to contrast willfulness with willingness. Willfulness is resistance. It's the, I don't want to accept this, it's too hard, it won't work. It's the ego trying to reclaim control and pretend it can rearrange reality. But paradoxically, that just keeps you stuck.
Whereas willingness is opening up.
Willingness is opening up to what is. It's choosing to engage with the pain and choosing to do what works. It's turning toward life moment by moment.
Okay, let's make this super actionable. What are the concrete steps we can take every day to disarm that need for defense and commit to radical acceptance?
A great place to start is just to actively hunt for the shoulds and ought tos in your own head. Anytime you hear yourself think, this shouldn't be happening, or they ought to have treated me better, that is pure non-acceptance. Those thoughts aren't facts, they're just demands you're placing on reality.
And we also have to get really clear on what we can and cannot control.
Absolutely. You can control your behavior and your choices. You cannot control other people, past events, or your initial thoughts and feelings. When you really internalize that you can't force your thoughts or feelings to go away, you can let go of that exhausting battle to suppress them.
We also have to drop the moral judgment.
Take a strictly non-judgmental stance. Stop labeling things good, bad, right, or wrong, and instead focus on just the facts of the situation. Strip out all the emotional add-ons. If a colleague was late, the fact is, they arrived at 10.15. The non-acceptance story is they're unprofessional and disrespectful. Radical acceptance sticks to the 10.15.
And what about the physical component of this?
You have to be willing to just be in the present moment, even if it's deeply uncomfortable. And you have to trust the process. Trust that emotions are temporary. They will rise and fall like waves. This is where the practice meets the spiritual shift. You allow the fear to be there because you know that you, the formless awareness, are not the wave of fear. You are indestructible.
The classic example of this is the driver who's stuck in traffic.
It's perfect. Non-acceptance turns a physical reality traffic into psychological warfare. You spiral into anger, self-judgment. I'm such an idiot for taking this route. I shouldn't have left so late. We all have. Radical acceptance shifts your focus. You accept the reality. I am stuck in traffic. I am going to be late. I cannot change this fact right now. You sit with the disappointment, but you stop the suffering. And then you can reframe your time. Okay, I'll listen to this deep dive, or I'll use this time to call my son. It shifts you from destructive rumination to, at the very least, peaceful stillness.
So if we take this internal commitment to defenselessness and we bring it into the professional world, it has to fundamentally change how we communicate and how we lead.
Oh, completely. Think about a really mundane workplace example. A colleague asks, do you always butter your bread that way? Which really means, do you always format your reports like that?
Right.
The instinctive defensive reaction, who are you to criticize me, is that same combat posture we talked about. We deploy the ego defenses, justifying, blaming, withdrawing over a tiny piece of feedback.
And when that's happening all the time in an organization, it's a huge problem.
It leads to constant conflict, power struggles, and a total collapse of trust, because nobody can rely on anyone else's objective assessment of a situation. If 95% of your energy is spent guarding your identity, there's nothing left for actually solving problems.
It makes genuine collaboration almost impossible.
It does.
So what are the concrete, non-defensive things you can do when you get criticized at work?
Okay, first, when the criticism comes, just breathe. Internally label it feedback and just listen without interrupting. You can correct the record later once everyone's calm.
Okay.
Second, actively look for the ounce of truth. Even if 90% of what they're saying is exaggerated, find the 10% that's accurate and own it. Saying, you're right, I did miss that deadline, inspires immediate confidence in your objectivity.
It shows you're not fused with that part of your ego that has to be perfect.
Exactly. And crucially, try to realize that a lot of criticism is actually about the other person's story, their anxiety, their unmet needs, their preferences. It's not always a personal failing on your part.
So you can ignore the extreme language, like always and never.
Ignore it. And finally, always listen for the hidden need in a complaint. A customer who's complaining about a defective product isn't just trying to argue. They need to feel secure. They need reliability. Addressing that underlying need builds loyalty way more effectively than just justifying the product's failure.
And when individuals in a team start doing this, the collective result is the creation of psychological safety, which is a term that gets thrown around a lot.
It does, and it's often misunderstood. Psychological safety isn't just about being nice. It's a shared belief that the team environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking.
Meaning you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up.
Right. For sharing ideas, asking questions, raising concerns, or most importantly, admitting mistakes. It's a group-level thing where team members feel respected enough to drop their defensive war maneuvers.
This has to be crucial for modern companies that are dealing with so much uncertainty. What are the big proven benefits?
Well, it's the engine of learning. It significantly increases the likelihood of innovation succeeding because innovation requires cooperation and a willingness to throw out new, maybe flawed ideas.
Right.
It also dramatically facilitates learning from mistakes. In psychologically safe environments, like in hospitals, error reporting rates go way up. Not because more mistakes are happening, but because people know they won't be punished, which turns a mistake into a learning opportunity instead of something to hide.
And it impacts engagement and creativity, too.
Absolutely. It improves employee engagement because people feel comfortable contributing their whole selves. And inclusive leadership builds safety, which then increases team innovation because employees feel safe enough to question old procedures and share new ideas.
Okay, a common fear when people talk about psychological safety is that it will lead to complacency, a lowering of standards. How do you balance that with the need for accountability?
That balance is the critical dialectic. Psychological safety is the foundation for healthy accountability. It's not the enemy of it.
How so?
Well, safety is what allows people to admit errors and ask for help without fearing blame. If you're afraid of being blamed, you hide your mistakes, and then accountability just becomes a weapon. Accountability, on the other hand, ensures that people take ownership and have the discipline to meet high standards. They work together. You get high standards without high fear.
But there's a too much of a good thing effect, right? Are there times when too much safety can actually be a bad thing?
The research suggests yes, when it's unbalanced. One concern is that very high PS can sometimes enable unethical behavior.
Really?
Yeah, one study found that in teams with extremely high safety, members who were very utilitarian focused only on outcomes were actually more likely to do things like cheat because the lack of fear of punishment lowered the barrier for taking shortcuts.
Wow, that's fascinating. Safety enabling misconduct. What's the other drawback?
Excessively high psychological safety has been linked to lower work motivation. It can lead to complacency. If the team is just too comfortable and there's basically zero interpersonal risk, members might become less likely to challenge poor performance or rigorously improve processes. It can lead to stagnation.
So the goal isn't a pillow fort.
No, the goal is a high-performance learning environment. And that balance is achieved through leadership that is both inclusive and demanding.
So participatory management.
Paired with clear expectations and a clear team structure. You need defined roles and goals along with strong, cohesive relationships. That gives you high support without sacrificing the rigor you need for excellent performance.
So we began this deep dive with the sheer exhaustion of trying to manage this fragile identity of guarding the ghost. We saw how that strategic, performative vulnerability that we often use in relationships is just another sophisticated defense mechanism.
Right. It's not real openness. And from there, we charted this radical path toward a genuine, enduring strength that's found in defenselessness.
The essential revelation is that true invulnerability doesn't come from building a better fortress. It comes from realizing that the thing we're trying so hard to protect, the ego, the narrative of me, isn't even our true self.
We moved from diagnosing those complex, draining systems of pseudo-vulnerability through the really profound inner work of disidentification and learning to accept the cracks in our armor.
And we anchored the whole practice with that essential tool of radical acceptance.
The takeaway really is that whether you are trying to navigate a conflict in a relationship or give critical feedback to a colleague, the fundamental strength comes from recognizing that nothing essential about who you truly are can ever be broken.
That relentless exhaustion of strategic defense, it's entirely optional. By embracing defenselessness, by letting go of the need to argue with reality, we can stop managing a public relations campaign for a fixed identity. And instead, we can allow ourselves to live fully from that ever-present, formless source of wisdom and love.